Everyone, thanks for your patience. I spent a lot of spring break getting notes organized to deliver chapter 8 and 9, and by the time you're seeing this, I will have put them up on Sunday night, March 17th. So, hope you had a great break and everything. I know this material is quite involved. The entire semester, let's face it, is involved. As psychology electives go, they vary. You know, cognitive psychology is a class that relies on experiments to explain itself, empirical evidence to advance ideas. Many of the experiments that we read about date to the 50s, 60s, 70s. It's amazing. And this Kostlin article that features so prominently in chapter 8 is remarkably old. So I appreciate your perseverance. It's a lot of material. The one aid I can give is to make tests count for more than quizzes and have the quizzes be predictive of tests. But as I'm going through a chapter, I'm always, I guess you could say, I'm not even sure what the word is, making tough decisions. What can I leave out? You know, if one topic flows to the next, how can I justify leaving one of those out? It's a hard call sometimes. So I think the book is really well written. I really like Galati, and I used her when I last taught cognitive in 2018. But I just want to say I do appreciate the sheer volume of material, and that's the spirit in which I'm making notes. I really want to draw attention to the highlights. I know it's a little bit lazy to capture entire paragraphs, but those are the most germane paragraphs in my opinion. So again, thanks for a great effort. And the quiz scores have been a little bit below the test scores, but that's on purpose. The idea is for the quizzes to predict the tests, and I think that's been a success so far. Well, I'm going to get to chapter 8, knowledge representation, storing and organizing, and long-term memory, which I'll abbreviate as LTM in the future. But the first question that will concern us is how stored knowledge is organized. There are several ways of arranging and storing. I'm going to go to the next slide here. Information, and each way has different implications for ease of access. So an analogy, and this is one of those paragraphs that I like to quote because she does such a good job, of your bookshelves, an analogy of your bookshelves. Think about your books and how they're arranged. You may have a section for textbooks, nonfiction, mysteries, what have you, or you may have all the books alphabetically, or you may have all the tall on one shelf and the short on another, as I have on my shelf. And each possibility represents a different way of storing them. So if you wanted to find a particular book, but you forgot the name, if you've arranged your books alphabetically, you'll be able to find it. And this sort of an organization scheme is arguably how we'll speak of long-term memory and the organization schemes that dictate long-term memory. So this idea of concepts and categorization, Medine said that concepts and categories are the blocks of human thought, and they are. And sometimes that's adaptive, sometimes that helps us answer questions, and sometimes that leads to prejudices that we've categorized people or things in such a way that is harmful or discriminatory, possibly, but in other cases it may be adaptive. So to have discriminations of dangerous things, for example. So there are certain breeds of dogs that I tend to steer clear of because I think I've made an adaptive categorization of those dogs as being dangerous. And we all have those sorts of things. So, for instance, doctors must categorize. I think back 4 years ago when COVID diagnoses were treated much more grimly than they are today. And in fact, today, it's amazing. The isolation protocol has all but been abandoned. You know, people are only required to stay away for a few days, and you don't even have to have a negative test. That's the policy here at SFA. That's a true story. And I think that's widespread. That I was diagnosed back in October. I took a few days away, but they did not require a negative test for me to come back, which is a suggestion of how far things have come in terms of how we're treating COVID. But as back in April of 2020, 4 years ago, if it were the case that somebody was diagnosed with COVID, might it be something else? We have thought it was something else leading into it. What's the difference between COVID and a normal cough? Well, the COVID cough was a dry cough. It persisted longer. It was a little bit more intense, etc. You know, there were a handful of symptoms. So the doctor is in a position where he or she must categorize and determine whether it was a real possibility of COVID. And back then, the emotional import of having COVID was much different than it is today. Not to say that it wasn't serious, but we've got more complete information and a better adaptation than we did in the past.